The sacrificial pit. The night was heavy with smoke and chanting. The alien city glowed with strange lights, and every street led to the sacred pit. Crowds gathered, their voices rising like a storm. They came to see the sacrifice, to please the so-called gods. At the edge of the pit, priests in black robes moved in a circle. They carried torches, their faces painted with symbols of fear. The ground trembled, and from deep below came the sound of growls. The people shivered, believing the monster inside was the voice of their gods. Among the crowd stood a human. His name was not known here, for he was a stranger in this land. He wore no fine robes, no armor, only simple clothes torn by travel. His eyes, however, were sharp. He watched everything with quiet anger. He had seen lies like this before, and he hated them. The priests raised their hands, calling for silence. From the shadows, guards pulled a young alien girl forward. She had silver skin that shimmered in the torchlight. Her eyes, wide with fear, reflected the fire. The chains on her wrists clinked as she struggled, but the guards dragged her without mercy. The crowd gasped in awe. Some wept, others cheered. They believed she was chosen by the gods. They believed her sacrifice would bring good harvests and protect them from disaster. The human clenched his fists. He knew the truth. There were no gods here, only monsters and men who used fear to rule. The pit yawned wide before them. Its edge was carved with strange runes, and black smoke rose from the depths. From below, a deep roar shook the earth. The monster was awake, waiting. The girl's knees trembled. Her voice broke as she cried out, "Please, I do not want to die." But the priests ignored her, chanting louder. The human's heart pounded. He felt every word cut into him. This was not his world, not his people. Yet something inside told him he could not stay still. He had fought before. He had lost before. But to watch a child be thrown into a beast's mouth was a sin too great. The priests lifted their staffs, signaling the final moment. The guards dragged the girl to the edge. She struggled, her chains rattling against the stone. The crowd leaned forward, hungry to see the gods devour their gift. The human pushed through the crowd, his jaw tight, his breath sharp. The girl's eyes met his, desperate and pleading. In that moment, time seemed to stop. The human felt a fire rise inside him, stronger than fear, stronger than reason. He could not let her fall. The priests raised their voices, calling the beast to rise. The ground cracked, and a terrible growl burst from below. The smoke thickened, glowing with red light. The people dropped to their knees in terror, worshipping the false gods. But the human stood tall, defiant. The guards lifted the girl higher, preparing to throw her into the pit. The human's hand went to his belt, where he carried a knife, small but sharp. His mind raced. He had no plan, no allies, only courage. But courage was enough. With a deep breath, he stepped forward. His voice rang out, cutting through the chants. "Stop!" The crowd froze. Their eyes widened. No one had ever dared speak against the priests. The guards hesitated. The girl stared at him in shock. The priests turned, their painted faces twisted with rage. "You dare defy the gods?" One of them hissed. His voice echoed unnaturally, feeding the people's fear. The human took another step forward, his knife gleaming faintly in the firelight. "They are no gods," he said, his voice steady. "Only liars hiding behind fear." The people gasped. Some backed away, terrified the gods would strike him down. Others stared, unable to believe his courage. The girl's tears slowed, hope flickering in her eyes. The ground shook again, and from the depths of the pit came a roar so loud it split the night. The beast was rising. Its eyes glowed like burning coals. Chains rattled in the darkness. The priests shouted, "See, the gods are angered." But the human did not flinch. The guards tightened their grip on the girl, preparing to throw her in quickly. The priests raised their staffs high. The people covered their faces, waiting for blood, but the human moved. His body tensed like a spring. He shoved past the nearest guard. His knife flashing, the guard cried, Out, stumbling, the girl slipped from his grasp, landing hard but alive. The human caught her chain and pulled her close. The crowd screamed in shock. The priests howled in rage. "Blasphemy, blasphemy," they cried. The human stood at the edge of the pit, holding the girl against him. Behind them, the monsters. Growl grew louder, its shadow rising up from the smoke, and in that moment, the world held its breath. A human had defied the gods. A girl had been saved from the edge of death, and the monster was awake. The Forbidden's rescue. The crowd erupted into madness. Some screamed in fear. Others cursed the human for his crime. The priest's chants turned into shrieks of rage. Their staffs glowed with strange symbols, and their voices echoed like thunder. They pointed at the human, calling him cursed, calling him doomed. But the human did not care. He held the alien girl tightly, her body trembling against him. Her silver skin glistened with sweat, her eyes wide with both fear and hope. The pit behind them roared louder, smoke spilling out like a living thing. The monster within scraped against the stone, chains clattering. Like thunder, the guards drew their blades, their faces twisted with anger and confusion. They had always obeyed the priests, always believed the gods were real, but now for the first time, they faced a choice. One human against them all. One human against their gods. The human raised his knife. It was small, almost laughable against the curved alien blades, yet his stance was firm. His eyes burned with a fire none of them had seen before. "If you come closer," he said, his voice low but sharp, "you'll fall before me, just as your monster will." The crowd gasped. The words spread through them like fire. A single man claiming he could stand against the gods. Some called him mad, others whispered that maybe he spoke the truth. The girl clung to him, whispering, "Why? Why are you helping me?" The human glanced at her. His voice softened for a moment. "Because no one deserves to be food for a lie." The guards roared and charged, their blades flashing in the torchlight. The human moved fast, faster than they expected. His knife caught the first guard's wrist, sending his weapon clattering to the ground. The human's fist followed, striking him down. The second guard swung wide. The human ducked, pulling the girl with him. Sparks flew as steel scraped against stone. The human kicked hard, sending the guard staggering back. The crowd cried out. Never before had they seen a man fight with such fury. The priests shouted louder, "Seize him, kill the blasphemer, throw them both into the pit." Their voices cracked with desperation. They feared not just the human's blade, but his defiance, for defiance was a spark, and sparks could burn down empires. More guards rushed forward. The human gritted his teeth. His arm ached, his chest heaved, but he stood unbroken. He fought not just with his blade, but with every ounce of will. Every strike was a message, every block a roar of defiance. He would not let them win. The girl tried to pull at her chains, desperate to help, but the iron was too strong. Still, her presence gave the human strength. He felt her eyes on him, her faith slowly building. She believed in him now, and that belief was power. Then the ground shook violently, the pit roared. Like a volcano, a massive claw tore through the smoke, black and scaled, dripping with glowing slime. The monster had risen halfway, its body coiled with muscle, its eyes blazing red. The people fell to their knees, wailing and covering their faces. "The gods have come," they cried, but the human only growled. He had seen monsters before. He had fought beasts that men called unstoppable. To him, this was no god, only flesh and blood. The priests spread their arms, their voices filled with triumph. "See, fools, the gods answer us. They will strike down this heretic. They will take their sacrifice." The human spat on the ground. "Your gods are nothing but cages made of fear," he said. His words cut through the smoke like a blade. The priests staggered, for even they could feel the crowd shifting. Doubt had entered their hearts. The monster's head rose higher, its jaws opening wide. Its roar blasted like a storm. The human's hair whipped in the force. The girl screamed, clutching her ears. The guards hesitated, caught between the beast's fury and the human's defiance. The human's mind raced. He could not fight both the priests and the beast at once. But he knew one thing. He would not let the girl fall. With one sharp move, he cut the chains from her wrists. The iron clattered to the stone. For the first time, she was free, she gasped, staring at him as if he were a miracle. Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear now, but from relief. She whispered, "You freed me." The human nodded, his jaw set. "And I'll keep you free, even if I have to fight every god in this world." The crowd roared in shock. Some began to cheer. Only a few voices at first, then more. A wave of sound rose, confused, frightened, but filled with awe. The priests screamed for silence, but their voices no longer drowned all others. The seed of rebellion had been planted. The monster growled, its claws gripping the stone, pulling itself higher. The human tightened his grip on the girl's arm, pulling her back from the edge. He knew this fight was only beginning. The forbidden's rescue was done. Now came the true test, man against monster, truth against lies. And as the smoke thickened, the human stood tall, defiant against both beast and gods, his heart steady, his blade ready. For this was not just a rescue. This was the birth of a war. The beast awakens. The air grew heavy as the pit shook again. The smoke thickened, turning red as if fire burned deep inside. The ground cracked under the weight of something massive rising from below. The crowd screamed, their chants turning into cries of terror. The human pulled the alien girl close, shielding her from the heat that poured out of the pit. His knife trembled in his hand, not from fear, but from the sheer size of the shadow rising beneath him. He had seen many beasts in his life, but never one born from worship and fear. The monster emerged, its head breaking through the smoke. Horns curled back from its skull. Its jaws stretched wide enough to swallow a man whole. Its eyes glowed like molten fire, dripping with hatred. Black slime oozed from its teeth and hissed as it hit the stone. The priests raised their hands, shouting in triumph, "Behold, the gods have risen," they cried, their voices cracked with desperation. They pointed at the human and the girl. "Feed them, feed the beast. Let the gods taste defiance." But the crowd no longer looked at the priests with blind faith. Many stared at the human, watching him stand unbroken. They whispered, their voices trembling, "He fights for her. He fights against the gods. He fights when none of us dared." The beast roared, the sound tearing through the air like thunder. The force knocked people to the ground. The human staggered but kept his grip on the girl. His ears rang, but his spirit stayed strong. The monster's claws dug into the stone as it pulled itself higher. Its body was covered in scales black as night, each scale shining like armor. Its breath stank of death, rolling out in hot waves that made the crowd choke. The girl clutched the human's arm, her voice breaking. "You cannot fight this. No one can." The human looked at her, his eyes hard. "It bleeds, and if it bleeds, it can die." His words were simple, but they cut through the terror like a blade. The girl's eyes widened, her trembling slowed. For the first time in her life, she heard someone speak of the beast as a thing, not a god. The beast slammed a claw down. The stone shattered. Dust flew, screams echoed. The priests laughed, certain that the monster would crush the human, but he did not run. He stood his ground, knife raised. The first swing of the monster's claw came like a falling mountain. The human yanked the girl aside. The claw smashed into the earth, splitting the stone where they had stood. The ground quaked. The crowd fell back, terrified of both man and beast. The human's chest heaved. His knife was small, far too small for such a foe, yet his eyes did not waver. He had faced hopeless battles before. This was just another. He darted forward, striking at the beast's wrist. The blade cut shallowly, but blood thick and dark oozed from the wound. The crowd gasped in shock. The priests froze, their eyes wide. For centuries they had said the beast was divine, untouchable, eternal. And now, before their eyes, it bled. The human turned to the crowd, his voice rising above the chaos. "You see," he shouted, "it is no god, it is only a beast." His words struck the people like lightning. A ripple of doubt spread through them. The priests screamed louder. "Lies, blasphemy, do not believe him." But their voices shook, their power slipping away. The monster roared again, wounded and enraged. It swung its tail, smashing through the stone pillars around the pit. The human pulled the girl down, debris crashing around them. His lungs burned, his arms ached, but he rose again, defiant. The girl's eyes shone with something new, not only fear, but belief. She whispered, "You heard it. You truly heard it." The human nodded, sweat running down his brow. "This fight isn't over, but now we know it can fall." The beast lunged again, its jaws snapping shut inches from them. The human rolled aside, dragging the girl with him. His knife slashed along its jaw. Sparks flying, the monster shrieked, its roar breaking the night. The crowd watched in awe. Many no longer bowed, no longer prayed. They stood, whispering to one another, "The gods are false, the beast bleeds, the priests have lied." Their faith cracked, piece by piece. The priests panicked, their chants grew frantic. They begged the beast to kill, to destroy, to silence the truth. But the monster no longer listened. It fought not for gods, but for itself, for hunger, for rage. The human planted his feet, his knife steady. He knew he could not slay the beast yet, but every cut, every dodge, every word shook the foundation of this false faith. He had begun a battle not just of flesh, but of belief. And as the monster's eyes burned brighter, the human's fire burned hotter, one man against a god, one knife against claws and teeth. Yet in that moment, the crowd began to believe not in gods, not in priests, but in him. The beast had awakened. But so had something greater, the spirit of defiance, the courage to stand, the power of a single human who refused to bow. Asterisk man against monster. The night was fire and stone. The beast stood fully above the pit now, towering higher than the temple walls, its claws dug into the cracked earth, its breath spilling out in waves of burning heat. The priests screamed for the crowd to kneel, but few obeyed. Their eyes were locked on the human, who still stood with a blade too small for such a monster. The alien girl clung to his arm, trembling, but refusing to look away. She had never seen anyone fight against the gods, never seen courage this sharp. The human's chest rose and fell, his knife slick with the beast's dark blood. His body was bruised, his skin torn, but his eyes were steady. The beast let out a roar that split the sky. Stones rattled from the walls, and the crowd covered their ears. The sound was rage, hunger, and power all mixed into one. Then, with a sudden movement, the monster lunged, its jaws opened like a canyon, teeth shining wet in the firelight. The human pulled the girl aside, rolling across the broken ground. The beast's jaws snapped shut where they had stood, crushing stone into dust. The crowd screamed, but then gasped when the human rose again, blade ready. He looked like a man standing against a storm, fragile but unyielding. The beast swung a claw, sharp enough to slice stone. The human ducked, the wind of the strike tearing across his back. He darted forward, his knife flashing. The blade bit into the beast's forearm. More black blood spilled. The monster bellowed in pain, its massive body shaking the earth. The crowd could not believe it. Their gods bled again. Their gods howled in pain. Some began to shout in anger, not at the human, but at the priests who had lied. The priests raised their staffs, desperate. "Silence, silence. You fools, the beast is divine." But the people no longer listened. Their eyes were wide with wonder. A single man had made their eternal god stagger. The beast struck again. Its tail whipped through the air, smashing into a pillar. The stone burst apart, dust and fire filling the night. The human shielded the girl with his body, the impact throwing them both to the ground. His lungs burned, his ribs ached, but he pushed himself up once more. The girl grabbed his arm, her voice breaking. You cannot win alone. He looked at her, sweat running into his eyes. Then I am not alone anymore. Her breath caught, and for the first time she stood taller, her fear turning into resolve. Together they faced the beast, small against its massive form, yet unbroken. The monster roared and charged. Its claws tore at the earth. Its eyes locked on the human. He braced himself, knife ready. The beast lunged, and at the last second, the human rolled beneath it. His blade slashed deep into its leg. The beast howled, crashing into the temple. Wall, the people gasped. Some even cheered, their voices rising with each strike. The human's defiance was becoming their own. The priests shrieked with fury, their power slipping away with every drop of monster blood. The beast turned, slower. Now its movements heavy with pain. Its scales cracked where the human's blade had cut. The human raised his knife, his voice carrying across the pit. It is no god, only flesh. The crowd erupted. Their fear was breaking, their chains of faith crumbling. They began to chant not for the priests, not for the beast, but for the human. Their voices gave him strength. The beast roared again, enraged by their cries. It slammed its claw into the ground, sending out a shockwave. The human staggered. The girl nearly fell, but he caught her, steadying her with a firm grip. His body shook, but he refused to kneel. He ran forward, faster than the crowd could follow. He dodged a claw, leapt onto the beast's arm. His knife dug deep into its cracked scales. He climbed higher, cutting with every step. The monster thrashed, slamming itself against the wall, but the human held on. The girl cried out, "Hold on." Her voice was sharp, filled with something new, faith, not in the gods, but in him, at last. The human reached its shoulder. His blade plunged deep into the beast's neck. The creature shrieked, the sound shaking the night. Its body staggered, blood pouring down its chest like fire. The crowd roared louder, a tide of voices shouting in unity. "It bleeds, it bleeds." Their fear turned to fury. Their worship turned to rebellion. Priests tried to flee, but the people blocked them, their eyes burning with anger at years of lies. The human leapt back down, landing hard. His body screamed with pain, but he stood tall, knife dripping with black blood. The beast staggered, still alive but weakened. Its eyes burned with rage, but its power was no longer unquestioned. The human pointed his knife at it, his voice thundering. "I am a man, and I will not bow." The crowd echoed him, their voices shaking the very air. For the first time in living memory, the people stood not in fear of the gods, but in defiance of them. The battle was not over, but something greater had already begun. A war of belief, a war of freedom, and at the heart of it stood one human, knife in hand, facing the monster like no one ever dared. The breaking of faith. The monster staggered, blood dripping from its wounds. Its roar was no longer a sound of power, but of pain. The once unstoppable beast had been hurt again and again, and the people could not deny what their eyes saw. The crowd that once bowed in fear now stood in silence, their hearts torn between terror and awakening. They had been told since birth that the beast was a god, that it could not bleed, that no blade could touch it, and yet a lone human had carved its hide, cut its flesh, and proved the priests wrong. The priests screamed desperately, their robes whipped in the hot wind as they raised their staffs high. "Do not believe your eyes, do not listen to him," they cried. "The gods test you, they test your faith. Kneel or face their wrath." But their words no longer carried the same weight. Whispers moved through the crowd like fire. "He is right, it bleeds, it is no god," one voice said. "They lied to us. All these years, they lied." Another shouted. The human stood firm, his knife dripping black blood, his chest heaving from the fight. His eyes burned with a fire brighter than the torches around him. He raised his blade high, pointing not just at the beast, but at the priests above. "You called this a god, but it bleeds like any creature. You called this sacrifice holy, but it is murder." His words crashed into the crowd like thunder. The people gasped, some clutching their faces. others dropping their charms and idols onto the ground. The girl beside him looked at the priests, her chains now broken, her eyes glowing with fury. "You made me a victim, but he made me free," she cried, her voice trembling yet strong. Cut through the night. The priests turned pale, they shouted louder. But the crowd no longer trembled. Instead, they began to rise, their bodies straightening, their fear fading. For the first time in their lives, they looked at the priests, not as messengers of gods, but as men, weak men hiding behind robes and lies. The beast lashed out, swinging its tail. Dust and stone filled the air. The people flinched, but when they looked again, the human was still standing, guarding the girl. His defiance was like a shield, and it spread into their hearts. One brave voice shouted from the crowd, "We believed your lies, we gave you our children, but no more." Another cried, "If one man can fight the gods, then we can fight too." Priests panicked. "Silence," they roared. "You bring doom upon us all." But their fear betrayed them. Their power was crumbling before their eyes. The human raised his blade higher, his voice steady. "They ruled you with fear. They fed you lies. But look at your God. It falls tonight." The crowd erupted. Their voices rose not in prayer, but in anger. The sound rolled through the night, shaking the priests to their knees. Torches fell as people pushed forward, no longer worshippers but rebels. The girl stepped closer to the human, her eyes shining. "They fear you now. Not their beast, they fear the truth." The human nodded, never taking his eyes off the monster. "Truth is sharper than any blade, and now they cannot unsee it." The beast roared again, enraged by the growing defiance. It smashed its claws into the earth, shattering stone. But the crowd no longer bowed. Instead, they shouted at it, their anger drowning its roar. "No God, no God," they cried, their voices like waves. The priests fell back, their chants broken. For generations, they had commanded obedience with a single word. Now their words were powerless. Their followers had turned. Their temple of fear was cracking. The human gripped his knife tighter. His body shook with exhaustion. But he felt strength flow into him from the crowd's cries. He was no longer fighting for himself or the girl alone. He was fighting for all of them, for their freedom. The girl looked at him, her voice soft but filled with awe. "You are one man, yet you are changing a world." He glanced at her, his lips tight. "One man can defy gods, but only a people can break them forever." The monster's blood dripped onto the stones, sizzling like acid. Its strength was still great, but its power over hearts had shattered. The battle was not only in claws and blades anymore, it was in belief. And belief was slipping away from the priests like sand through fingers. The crowd surged forward, not to worship, but to rise. Their voices filled the night, louder than the beast, louder than the priests. For the first time, the people no longer feared the gods. And as the humans stood ready to strike again, the priests realized the truth. The greatest wound had not been cut into the beast's flesh, but into their lies. Their faith was broken, and their power was ending. The final blow. The pit burned like a furnace. The beast towered above the temple ruins. Its scales cracked, its body bleeding black fire. Its roars shook the ground, each one filled with rage and hunger. The priests were pale, their voices broken, their chants weak. They had promised the people that this monster was eternal, untouchable, divine. But tonight, the lie was dying before their eyes. The human stood in the rubble, knife in hand. His clothes were torn, his skin was cut, blood ran down his arms. Yet his eyes burned brighter than the flames. He had no armor, no shield, only will beside him. The alien girl stood, her chains broken, her voice trembling but strong. She looked at him as if he carried the weight of a world. The beast raised its claw and struck. The ground split as stone shattered into dust. The human threw himself aside, dragging the girl with him. The impact cracked the earth, shaking the crowd back. The people cried out, not in worship, but in fear for the man who had become their hope. The priests shouted, their voices desperate. Kill him, crush him, silence the heretic. But no one listened. The crowd no longer knelt, their eyes followed. Only the human. The monster lunged again, jaws wide, its breath burning like acid. The human rolled beneath it, his blade flashing. The knife dug deep into its throat. Black blood sprayed across the stones. The beast shrieked, a sound that shook the sky itself. The people gasped. They had never seen the monster wounded so deeply. They cried out, "It can die, it can die." Their voices rose like thunder. Shaking the priests' hearts, the human staggered back, his chest heaving, his arms trembled. His blade slick with blood, he looked at the crowd, at their faces filled with new fire. Then he looked at the girl, her eyes shining with hope. "We end it now," he said. The beast roared, enraged. Its tail swung wide, smashing through stone. Pillars, sending rubble flying. The human shielded the girl, his back cracking under the force. But he stood again. Every bone in his body screamed. But his will did not break. The girl's voice cut through the chaos. "You cannot kill it alone. Let me help." The human looked at her, his face hard. But he nodded. Together they ran, darting between the monster's claws, dodging death with every step. The crowd watched in silence, holding their breath. The human shouted, his voice sharp. "Distract it." The girl grabbed the fallen torch and hurled it. The fire struck the beast's eye. It roared in fury, turning its massive head toward her. The human seized the moment. He leapt onto the chains that still hung from the pit's edge. Climbing higher, the beast struck at the girl, but she dove aside. The human climbed faster, his knife clenched in his teeth. He reached the monster's neck, its scales cracked and glowing with blood. With all his strength, he plunged the blade. Deep, the beast screamed, its body thrashing. The temple walls shook, rubble fell. Dust and fire swallowed the night. The human held tight, his arms burning. Twisting the blade deeper, the black blood poured like a river. The crowd roared, their voices rising as one. "Fall, fall, fall." The priests fell to their knees, their staffs clattering, their power shattered. The monster staggered, its massive body swaying. It tried to shake him off, but the human clung. Like iron, he shouted, his voice raw. "You are no god, you are only flesh." With one final push, he drove the blade through its throat. The beast collapsed, its roar turning into a dying scream. The earth shook as its body crashed into the pit. Stones shattered, fire burst, and then silence. The night held its breath. The human fell, rolling across the ground. His chest heaved, his knife broken. His body was battered, but he was alive. The girl rushed to him, her hands trembling. She pulled him up, her voice filled with awe. "You killed it! You killed their god!" The crowd erupted, their voices shook the heavens. No god, no priests, no lies. They cried, they surged forward, tearing down the idols. Breaking the chains, their faith had died, but in its place something greater had risen. Freedom. The priests tried to run, but the people caught them. Their power was gone, their lies broken. They screamed for mercy, but no one listened. The human stood, his body swaying. His eyes swept across the sea of faces. He had fought for one girl, but now he had given courage to a world. He raised his broken blade high, his voice echoing. "No man, no woman, no child will ever bow to this lie again." The people roared, their voices rising like a storm. The night belonged to them now. Not to false gods, not to priests, but to truth. And as the beast's corpse burned in the pit, the human stood with the girl at his side, weary but unbroken. He had slain more than a monster. He had slain fear itself. A new dawned the night that began with fear, ended with silence. The beast's body smoldered in the pit, its black blood burning like coal. The air was heavy with smoke, but also with freedom. For the first time in memory, the people looked at the pit and saw not a god, but a corpse. The priests, once so mighty, lay broken, their staffs shattered, their robes torn. They crawled across the ground, begging, Their voices no longer thundered. They whimpered like cowards. "Forgive us, forgive us. The gods will punish you all," they cried. But no one listened. The crowd surged forward, not with fear, but with fire. Chains that had once bound sacrifices were torn apart. Idols that had stood for centuries were toppled. For generations the people had lived bowed under lies. But tonight they stood straight, their eyes fierce, their hearts alive. At the center of it all stood the human. His body bruised, his clothes torn, his blade broken, yet he seemed taller than the temple walls. The alien girl stood at his side, her eyes shining with gratitude and pride. She had been chosen to die, but now she was a symbol of life. The people stared at them both, silence falling over the crowd. Then one voice rose, strong and certain. "No gods, no priests." Another voice followed. "We are free." Soon the crowd roared together, their chant shaking the ruins. "Free, free." The human looked at them, his chest heaving. His voice, though hoarse, carried across the night. "You were never weak. They made you believe it. They fed your fear and called it faith. But you are stronger than fear, stronger than chains. Tonight you saw the truth." The crowd listened, their eyes wide. For centuries they had only heard sermons of obedience and sacrifice. But now they heard words of courage and defiance, and they believed. The girl stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. "He risked his life for me. A stranger. He stood when none of us dared, and in his defiance, I saw hope. We all saw hope." Her words lit the people like fire. The priests shrieked again, desperate. "Do not listen. The gods will rise again." But their words rang hollow. The people turned on them, dragging them from the temple. Their reign was over, their lies burned with the beast. The human closed his eyes for a moment, his body weary. He had not come to lead a people. He had only wanted to save one life. But now he had become something greater, a spark that ignited a flame. He looked at the girl, and she smiled through her tears. "You gave them freedom," she whispered. He shook his head, his voice low. "I only showed them they could take it." The dawn broke over the city. The first light of morning painted the ruins gold. The smoke cleared, and the people saw their world in a new light. A world without gods, without priests. A world where they could stand free. The crowd gathered around the human, not bowing, not worshiping, but standing as equals. One man had defied the gods, but it was all of them together who would shape the future. The girl took his hand, her silver skin glowing in the rising sun. She looked at him with a mix of awe and warmth. "You changed everything," she said softly. He met her gaze, tired but steady. "No, we changed everything." The people roared again, not with fear, but with joy. Children laughed, families embraced, and the chains of sacrifice were thrown into the fire. For the first time in living memory, the city was alive, truly alive. The human stood among them. Not as a king, not as a god, but as a man who had fought when no one else would. A man who showed that even the smallest blade could cut down fear itself. And as the sun rose higher, casting its light on the ashes of the old world, the people understood. They did not need gods to rule them. They needed only the courage to stand. The beast was dead. The priests defeated. The chains broken. The fear destroyed. A new dawn had come. And at its heart stood a human who defied the gods and won.